Hi, welcome. On this episode, I wanted to go ahead and start talking about my cosmology. This is not the most worked out thing of all time, um, but it's a culmination or a logical progression from some of the ideas that I've been sharing. So, we're going to go ahead and share screen. I did it properly that time. Look how fast that happened. So we're starting off with this concept, Holocaust theology. I was also just today looking at, of course, some interesting links. We got some interesting stuff going on. This was an interesting question. It was basically this person on Reddit was asking, what if everybody could have their own land, right? Then everybody who disagrees about norms, right? We all disagree about how things should be done, right? So everybody could have your own little asteroid, right? How about that? And people, I didn't, and some interesting discussion here. People basically saying the issue is like if some people want to come and wreck everybody's stuff, then you basically enter back into the immediate same problem. So we'll get into that. But I wanted to flash back to this post by Minister C, aka Claire Lise Boucher, aka Grimes. So this is from, wow, way over a year ago, a year and a half ago. Minister C was saying that space colonization can end Nazism. Seems like a lot of Lebensraum to go around. Also, this happened on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. So a lot of people thought that was pretty insensitive, but still a similar idea going on to this over here. So the reason why all this is relevant is that, there's basically the realm of something like religious prophecy or, what is the purpose of everything, something like this. And then there's also technology. So I brought up, Heidegger again to talk again about this idea of technicity, right? So what is being talked about here, with this idea of like, well, everybody should be able to have their own space, right? This would be a new situation which could be opened up because of how we choose to use technology. So basically the I'm thinking of this part from the Royal Tenenbaums that I really like, where he's like, everybody knows Custer died at Little Bighorn. What my book presupposes is maybe he didn't. Anyway, but so what my idea presupposes is, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Oh dear, didn't I have? Okay. Basically the idea that cosmology is going to wind up happening because of technology. So I have some more interesting relevant links here. I've showed this one before, right? So this article is in a way very directly relevant to my cosmological ideas. So this is the kind of thing. So basically, what does this article talk about? I'll read it to you a little bit. Time and the universe are on an infinite loop. Conformal cyclic cosmology and Nietzsche's eternal return. So there's a particular aspect of this where it basically talks about how in order for the eternal return to come out, all the details of a looping timeline need to be the same. So just for the reference of reading this into the record, for the point of reading this into the record, and also to eventually get to that point, because trying to figure out exactly where that is kind of hard, I'm going to read to you from this. So it says that Roger Penrose. Okay, also I should do a disclaimer or something. Like I'm going to talk about this, then I'm going to talk about Peter Desjardins or whatever, this person who Peter Teilhard Desjardins. Right? This person is well known for being like Catholic, but also very forward looking anyway. So kind of vitalist and has this idea of the omega point. So, and then other people have, taken, have tried to come along and, Teilhardian singularity. Anyway, people have come along and tried to like bolster up the scientific chops to basically show how all this is possible. I just want to say that like that's not, or like right here. I was curious to see this, like people talking about in the philosophy of science about, whether or not resurrection can be possible. So basically what we're talking about is, the idea of things that are classically the domain of religion in terms of resurrection and, starting a new world kind of thing. And basically the question of whether those things can be done with technology. And what could the significance of that be? And basically, as it says in my description, the overall upshot of my cosmology is the idea that we're going to eventually have to cause ourselves. There's actually a whole term for this. There's oh dear. Not trying to engage in self-harm. Although if you're opening up the question, right, of theodicy, as I do in my description, right, theodicy is the question of, why do bad things happen if, the creator is good? So the bottom line is going to be all of us put our seal of approval on what's happening already. So we already co-signed. So in terms of classical theodicy, you're thinking about the idea that God is somebody else. So again, we're looking at, the model of something more like entheism. Oh, I keep looking at this wrong. So entheism is, this idea that, psychedelics are entheogens. They help us connect with the divine within us. I guess this is not so much talking about psychedelics, but, there is this term entheogen, which is used, psychoactive substances. So it's another word in a way for psychedelic drugs, but maybe there's more to it. But anyway, in addition to it, we have things like pandeism. Pandeism is the idea that God created the universe, but then became the universe. There's a whole Wikipedia page for this, which is awesome, called God Becomes the Universe. So basically and then this also flows into ideas, like Atman is one. So the idea is when we classically, think about theodicy, we're basically saying, why does this have to happen? And it's we're blaming somebody else for why things are happening in this way. But I think that the sort of secret answer to this, which is sort of psychedelic, it's not so much that, it's not that reality's bad. It's not that we're being tortured or, things there's things like Prison Planet, right? Of course, they talk about it on InfoWars, but, Prison Planet ideas, which are basically Gnosticism. Basically they're the idea that, the world is bad, this wasn't supposed to happen, something went wrong, and so on and so forth. But my idea is more similar to this idea of the fortunate fall, which is basically, I think a classic idea of theodicy, which is basically that things wind up being better given that, bad things happen. So traditionally, the answer to theodicy is something like, well, we have to have free will. In order for us to have free will, we have to be able to do bad things. Or, in order to be able to appreciate good things, there have to be bad things, and so on and so forth. And then the argument usually winds up being about specific things. It's not just bad things in general. People, obviously, we bring up the Holocaust, and that's a big aspect of what Holocaust theology is about, right? Is the whole idea of well, how could God allow this to happen? Especially from the Jewish perspective, right? The idea that, we are the chosen. I was listening to a podcast where somebody was saying that some people interpret the Holocaust as saying, well, here's God breaking the covenant, right? God promised to protect us or whatever. So now being Jewish is optional. This was one interpretation, for example. But so this all has to do, again, just with theodicy in a way more generally, because we expect, we have all these expectations about divinity that, well, if the divine is good, if it really was doing the best that it could, it could eliminate all of this. Or this kind of thing is not necessary. And so therefore, we don't accept, there's I forget what quote it is, but when I think about theodicy, there's a Lewis Black joke that I think about. I don't know why I'm even typing it in. But it's basically this It's Lewis Black is talking about something that, the joke is that it shouldn't exist, and he's saying, or they're saying, right, like if there was a just and loving God, they wouldn't allow this kind of shit to go down, right? And they're speaking hyperbolically because they're talking about some pop culture thing that's annoying or something. But if there were a just and loving God, this wouldn't happen. That's basically the idea of theodicy, right? Is the idea of like, well, if God can do anything and is all good, why is there the Holocaust? Why are there children with cancer, right? Why did I have, so much social failure, right? It's not fair, right? No, it's social defeat. Social defeat is also failure is also a term. But what I'm trying to broach here is like the continuity between individual and mass trauma, if you want to say. Like there's the Holocaust, but then there's the way in which we've all been. This is funny because it goes into like even my own counseling right now. We've been delving into this question of what is trauma and so on and so forth, and so from like a psychoanalytic standpoint and so on. But that is relevant here. But the point is like we all have our own psychological trauma. So the idea is like why did that have to happen, right? Why did those people have to be so mean to us? It's basically like a question of theodicy. And when we're thinking about things like, like challenges are a test, or like everything happens for a reason, these are basically ways we do theology, or theodicy, like on a personal level, because we're trying to rationalize, we're trying to not be demotivated. So I couldn't find this, but this idea that a challenge is a spiritual test, and it's an opportunity to prove yourself. Anyway, I wanted to read about this because again, this is talking about. So Nietzsche is actually going to come up a couple times. And this is also again, we're getting in danger here. Like this is a big part of why it's hard for me to record these things, because obviously I'm getting into trouble in the sense of like here I am going to bring up Nietzsche. We started off with theodicy, the Holocaust theology. And so my idea, right, is that we're all going to basically sign off on everything that happens in history, including the Holocaust. So maybe we don't know yet why that's necessary or something. But, my idea is that, Nietzsche's idea of the eternal return can be brought about through technology. And the question is going to be, are we willing to do that? But then there's also a lot of variations that you can get into as to whether or not this really has to be the only universe, and things like that. But as I said, I wanted to read to you from this because there's a specific part of this that I want to get to. So, time and the universe are on an infinite loop. Conformal cyclic cosmology and Nietzsche's eternal return. Roger Penrose's conformal cyclic cosmology is a radical attempt to provide a comprehensive alternative to cosmology's standard story where our universe, or aeon, is one of many in a successive chain. Each new universe is different from the last. However, philosopher of physics Baptiste Le Bihan, sorry for mispronouncing that, presents a radically different perspective to Penrose's. He argues each new universe in the cycle is not new, rather it is the same universe repeating itself. Our universe is on an infinite time loop. With every ending, it is reborn, and everything happens exactly the same. This offers theoretical weight to ancient religious and Nietzschean ideas of eternal return, with massive consequences for science, philosophy, and the way we live our lives. So it's going to reference this again, basically, the idea that everything happens exactly the same. So that means like nothing can be different, right? So the idea of like, we'll have a better history, we'll just remove the Holocaust and Genghis Khan and the Black Plague or whatever it is, stereotypical things that are in history that are just bad. And it'll just like, we'll have the same timeline, but, we'll have all these, we'll make it better. It's sort of like oh, wow. There's a couple Baudrillard things I'm already thinking about. One was from Carnival and Cannibal, I believe. And the other, I believe, is from The Transparency of Evil. Operational whitewash, because basically it's the idea of like, we're going to give history cosmetic surgery. We're going to remove everything until there's nothing like unpleasant that's left. So that's one thing. But then there's another thing, which is it maybe at the end of Ventriloquist Evil? Yeah, it is actually. So we want to be the original. There's something else right here. The anxiety produced by everything that has escaped us since the beginning. Like I've talked about this before, about how this is like a very key passage of Baudrillard for me. Just the end of ventriloquist evil is like in terms of like, oh, simulacra and simulation. Like when people want to understand, like I don't advocate trying to like understand a thinker. Like the question is, what are the parts that are most interesting to you, and what use are you going to make of them? So in that context, like in terms of cannibalizing Baudrillard, the way Baudrillard talks about cannibalizing a car, right? This is a catalytic converter. Like this is platinum. Anyway, so the idea is basically like that the world that we exist in is symbolic because we're trying to ward off the anxiety of everything that has escaped us since the beginning about what has been given to us without our having anything to give back. So the intervention of my cosmology into, this idea of Baudrillard's is that, the mystery that remains for us to discover and to figure out how to work through is that, we are the ones who set this up. So like we gave this to ourselves. Like we gave this experience to ourselves. And in terms of like what we have to give back, that's just what we're doing. And eventually we're going to pay it forward by, creating another round of people who are then going to have to go through this whole thing again, including like we're going to be ourselves maybe even. But everything that has escaped us since the beginning, I associate with like uncertainty, things that are outside of our control or outside of our knowledge. And so I think about this very, let's see, I think I might have this. I think I might have something called like good incarnation protocol or something. Basically, I think instead of thinking about this in terms of like the subject, or I guess you could go to like Dasein or something like that, I use this idea of incarnation. So the idea is, as opposed to, making a Heidegger reference or something, it's more so like we're all incarnations of we're all manifestations of God, right? Like if you want to look at the Baha'i faith, for example, the idea of manifestations of God is that, these are incarnations. And then, again, we're in trouble here, right? We're a race car in the red, to quote Pulp Fiction. But even Savitri Devi, right, talked about how Hitler was a so-called avatar of Vishnu, right? But so within my cosmology, like the idea is like, that's not special. Like everybody's an avatar of Vishnu. Like there's a quote from Men in Black. It's like where the person's explaining like, there's always an Arquillian battle cruiser or a Curlian death ray or an intergalactic plague that's about to wipe up all this life on miserable little planet. I forget where I got that. Oh, but so basically the idea is like, yeah, we're all manifestations of God. Like this is basically the paradigm shift, because typically I think we think about things as being like mundane, like the whole like sacred mundane distinction. I wonder if we can bring something up here. But it's also related to, the creator-creation distinction. These are big problems that we have to wind up, designing theological answers to. Or something. Because these are the sorts of things that keep the myths of the world from truly, like, resonating. Because, again, like, in a way, we're just running Sri Ramakrishna, right? We're just running the idea that, all religions are one, basically. But so I extend this out, from a pantheist idea. I've been over this before, but, this idea, I've practiced all religions and they're the same God is behind all there. And then again, obviously, I've talked about this before. All religions are one is something by William Blake. And it's, again, just the idea that religions are talking about the same thing. But then again, we're already back in trouble because this whole idea of perennial philosophy and, traditionalism in terms of perennialism, like these are associated with the right wing, and it's like, it's bad, and, that doesn't stop the fact that I'm interested in it. I'm certainly trying to develop ideas around this that don't involve scapegoating, don't involve, there being a chosen group of people who's just supposed to be special and everybody's supposed to listen to them. Like, I don't believe that kind of thing. But I think the basic, the bitter pill to swallow is that, everybody's included, in terms of theodicy, like everybody's here, like everybody's part of the plan. Even the things that you don't think should be part of the plan, they're somehow part of the plan, and like in a way need to be given their due. So like this is an aspect, I don't know if I've thought of, I don't know who I could think about this with. This is something maybe we could go to Chat GPT with. I wonder if I can sort this out right quick. Oh, we can start now. We can just do it over here. Okay. So what did I want to ask? I forgot. Something about Theodicy, the bad things are happening. Shoot, I forgot. Oh, well. Manifestations of God. We're doing some good work here. So obviously we're jumping around, but, that's how it's going to be. But so there's this, and then there's another aspect of this from Baudrillard. Well, there is the idea that we want to be the original. So there's also the idea that the world exists without our having been consulted. That is a very powerful idea, but I'm not sure. Yeah, here it is. If this is the case, so, okay, it remains for us to understand what induces the human species to throw itself into such a performance. But there's nothing, unless we suppose that this is our real response, and this is our substitution mania in form of our counter gift, our challenge. So basically, Baudrillard's talking about how all the bullshit that Western culture does or whatever is somehow a symbolic response, just as, like a tribal culture or whatever, a singular culture, whatever. So this is something new for Baudrillard to consider, that what are the symbolic implications of, our technological universe or whatever, a truly inhuman science fiction universe. Anyway, so if this is the case, our entire technical universe, even in its most excessive elements, would then assume a high symbolic value as a response to the original gift, the original crime, that is the existence of the world without us, without our having been consulted. So this is very important because it's basically, in my opinion, it's Baudrillard saying that, everything going on with imperialism and power and control. I mean, this loops into things like punishment theory, right? The idea that, a lot of what we do is motivated by our fear of death. But so it's not just our fear of death, again, I've talked about this before, but, it's ontological terror, which can be associated with Afropessimism, right? Or it's metaphysical horror, by Kolakowski. Either way, these are it's not just fear of death. It's a fear of, it's actually funny because I'm in Lacanian psychoanalysis. It has everything to do with, Lacan, actually. So, Lacan, the real trauma, right? Because, in terms of like what trauma is, the whole idea is that the real is the most elusive of the three realms. It represents what is outside of and resists symbolization or representation through language. So if you wanted to start talking about, right, something that I talk about all the time, right, is that the world is ineffable, right? That, our words can't capture and our symbols can't capture what's going on. That's basically, like, in a way, everything that Lacan is about, right? The whole real is this, our inability to put things into words because of unrepresentable experiences, the return of the repressed. We can tell stories about what's going on with us, but we'll forget things. The impossibility of full integration. That's interesting. Because trauma involves the real, it is fundamentally resistant to being fully integrated into the person's existing narrative or sense of self. It remains a kind of hole or gap in the person's experience, which might cause ongoing disruptions. So now I want to talk about, I think it's Quran 172:6. No. No, not 172. I have a place. I've thought about this before, so I think it's on my subreddit. I think it involves 172. Oh, it's 7/172. Interesting. But so this goes again to being in conversation with, Baudrillard talking about like the universe exists without our having been consulted, right? So then like this is basically a passage from the Quran, which is like an anecdote from the creation where, there's Allah, which needs to be put into context of like what Allah means, because this gets into this idea of, the impossibility of full reintegration. So it's basically the idea that, this idea of God or the absolute as like an entity doesn't make sense, because if you're incarnated, there's distinctions between you and the absolute. Like if you're incarnated, you're not everything, and the absolute is not cut off from anything. So there's a way in which like you can't just be the perfect embodiment of everything. So therefore, everything which is embodied is limited, and in a way doesn't feel like it is the original, because if you're this is all just assertion, by the way. But so if you are, incarnated, that means that, for example, you will have uncertainty. You're not going to know where you came from. Like if you completely understand where you came from, then I basically say that's impossible, right? I think that, and again, this goes back to, my favoring of skepticism, Pyrrhonism, and so like the impossibility of knowledge. But anyway, so I think this verse from the Quran is really interesting, because this is a verse where Allah is basically summoning all of the descendants of the first person. And so this is considered Adam, but we definitely got to make sure and talk about Adam Kadmon. And then while we're at it, I think we can throw out some other things like Inua from Inuit mythology, which is a spirit or soul that exists in all people. So Inua is sort of like a spirit that runs through everything and like provides order. And similarly, Adam Kadmon, there's like an idea where it's like, pure potential, right? So it's basically in a way like, Adam Kadmon, this like original incarnated entity or something, contains all the possibilities of incarnation or something. And that's similar to here in the Quran. Like basically Adam is created or whatever, and then let's go Sahi, and mention when your Lord took from the children of Adam, from their loins, their descendants, and made them testify of themselves, saying to them, am I not your Lord? They said, yes, we have testified, lest you should say on the day of resurrection, indeed, we were of this unaware. So the thing is, Allah is basically, pulling out of the testicles or whatever of, which doesn't really make a lot of sense if you think about like biology or whatever, but if you just assume that, then this gets into, things like the philosophy of time, which of course we have to. I'm pretty sure this is the A theory. No. So there's McTaggart. So yeah, there's the A theory and the B theory. One is basically, okay, so B series, events ordered by which came before and which come after, and then events ordered by which are present, which are past, and which are future. So basically, I think this would be more like B series. It's basically that, all events are in time. They already exist. And so they just like are waiting for us to get there. Where was I going with that? But anyway, I'm talking about this thing from the Quran. So it's basically that, all the people, so again, you have to think, so it's not exactly like, we're pulling out the sperms, because of course, the genetic information for people thousands of generations away, like isn't going to exist. So it's not material in that way. But it's basically if you assume that, the souls of everybody who is ever going to exist, in a way, they already exist at the beginning of creation. And again, this is where, we start looping back around into things like the dreaming and this idea, because again, a lot of this is going to have to do with time. So there's a certain way in which like the origin of everything is happening always. It's always happening right now. But so anyway, this helps make the Quran passage make a little bit more sense. And so this is basically the way I would amend this, because, in a way, I seek to, incorporate all religions into my vision, right? So I guess I got to go into that in a little more detail. But that doesn't mean like I have to, in a way, it can't mean, right, that I'm committed to certain literalist translations and so on and so, like I have to do my own interpretation. So basically the way I would interpret this, instead of like there is an Allah and everybody comes out and says like, yes, you are Lord, like you get to do this. This is basically corollary to an aspect of my cosmology. But instead of having this be like mediated by Allah, where everybody's like, oh yeah, Allah is our Lord, it's basically a similar sort of idea, but it's basically that every incarnated being, it's almost like we need to come together as Voltron. Like we need to uh, overcome all our differences. And it's sort of like an ironic thing. It's like we're going to overcome all our differences and fulfill our potentials and come together and build something amazing. And the point of that building everything amazing is just to loop back around to where, like we've been miserable for like a million years. And I think it's a funny thing where I think it could be that like time, like in terms of like where we are in terms of the end of time, maybe the end of time is a lot like closer than we think. Because there's something about that's not the Pareto principle, is it? No, it's like the 80-20 principle. So basically, like I would think that it is the Pareto principle, but it's basically the idea that like 80% of the change or something like that is going to happen in the last 20%. So I think that keeps adding on. So in this last 20% where the 80 is happening, 80% of that is going to happen in the last 4%, right? Which is, I think, a fifth of 20, right? So basically, I think it could be that we're headed for like a cascade, almost like a house of cards falling in, where things can start to get very good very quickly in a way. At the same time, I think it's also agonistic because I think I think what there is a lot for us to do here at the end of time is basically to sit and think about what we've done, is to basically sit and do Theodicy from the standpoint where we are the ones who have caused this, right? It's not that we're trying to make excuses for some other deity. It's like we need to not necessarily come up with reasons. It's not about rationalization. It's more so about, it reminds me of bricolage, actually. And again, this idea of, we work with what we're given. Or like found materials. Like from our perspective, like history has supplied us just with like found materials, like a found object, like the idea of the Holocaust or, the Israel-Palestine conflict or the United States of America. Like these are things that we just find in our incarnation that are like there. And now like these things are there for us to interact with, for us to make creative expression about. So the question is how to like loop up from that to the idea of like, well, what can we make out of this? So as opposed to starting off with this triumphalist idea of like, oh, wow, everything's so amazing. Let's like make sure and go do that again. Like it's not starting off from this idea of like, oh, this is like complacently trying to do this, but it's very much so working through all of the nitty gritty, like, what shall we say? The details, basically. So I think the first thing, the thing that makes sense at first is to have this stance of like, oh, like this is overwhelming. The world is messed up, but there's a lot of like interesting things here. So we're basically like artists where we're trying to find, like, see what is around. It's almost like, you have sex with the people who are around you, right? Like location, right? And so similarly, like, I think that has a lot to do with, how we go about things on a daily basis. Like we work with our friends and our family. And this has a lot to do with our social ontologies or like, where it is that we happen to work. When we wake up every day, the whole past of our life is sort of like a found object because it's like, I'm not making all those choices right now in terms of everything that I did in the past. So when I confront like my present situation, like it's almost like the past me has handed me the situation. It's like, here, you figure out what to do with that. And like now we're in this time of global crisis, right? Where everything is like so uncertain and it's so scary. And in a way, there's competing things, right? In a way, this makes people want to double down. People don't want to think adventurously. This is in a way like terror management theory. Like when people are scared, they want to double down on what they think they know. But the issue, this is actually kind of interesting. We can get into this again, this idea of dialectics. Right? The issue is that concepts are not as simple as you think they are. So you don't really know what you think you know, which is almost true I would say by definition, because again, I'm more of a Pyrrhonist. So I would sort of agree that knowledge requires certainty. And so absent certainty, I would say there is no knowledge. I would even say there's no belief either. We don't have to have belief. But I mean, There's just a lot of different ways of thinking about things. So basically, that would relate here, though, because in order to state a belief, like part of the reason why we can't know things is that the world is changing so fast, or it's so uncertain that our language isn't mapping onto the world. But if we're describing a belief, we're really describing part of the world, right? We're describing part of us, right? In terms of like, we have a belief and that's supposed to mean something, right? So in a way, that's very similar to, the idea of, just something out there in the world. And then once you're being very skeptical, it's just as easy to doubt that we believe things anyway. But it seems like we believe things. It seems like we know things. And part of our, reaction when we get scared or we get threatened or we get undermined is we try to double down and we try to reach for the most solid things that we know, which is why people so often are running for science or they're running for, political power or pragmatism. That's just not how the world works, right? People are like running for, something to give their standpoint this objectivity, right? Where it's like you are arguing against the ocean, right? You are that person who is this? Oh yeah, this is just so good. I wonder if this is if there's the picture. So there's such a good, maybe I don't know if it's this one or not. But basically, like, this person got mad at the ocean, so the ocean. It's actually pretty freaking amazing. Like, I think that's amazing. It reminds me of one of my favorite literary devices. Left to my own devices, my literary devices. But anyway, there's apostrophe. I wonder if there's not a Wikipedia page about it. Basically, it's a poetic device where you treat things that are not animate as though they're animate. So, like, the idea of whipping the sea, it doesn't make any sense because it's like the ocean doesn't care. But anyway, when it comes to like a lot of like debates, I feel like a lot of people try to basically make it out that you're whipping the ocean. It's not just me that you're arguing with. You're arguing with objective reality, which makes you out of touch with reality. You're deluded. You're a child. Like, it's pretty funny to me, like being a Korean or iconoclast or whatever. There's very similar, you're a loser, you're an incel, you're a whatever. It's just like, it's very not funny in a way because it's not like I'm impervious. This kind of thing still can get to me. But noticing the pattern of like, it's the same freaking idea over and over again. It's just like, okay, you're bad, blah, blah, blah. Oh, you can't conform, so there's something wrong with you. It's like, okay, fine. But like in the meantime, we have all these big issues, right? Like Israel-Palestine and climate change and AI and China and America. And then like, it's just really funny because so many times when you have a, I don't know, just like a contrary idea or an interesting idea, everybody's against you for the same reasons, which is that they all want to just go back to their little like concepts. And like your idea can't accommodate. Anyway, getting off track here. I've been wanting to read this to you, so I'll keep going with this article. This is the one that's about Nietzsche and the eternal return. So again, this was also published on my birthday, on my 33rd birthday, right? So it says, reality extends far beyond our universe, which is just one among many universes. This is the worldview of Roger Penrose's conformal cyclic cosmology, an alternative to the standard model of cosmology. According to conformal cyclic cosmology, our universe, or aeon, as Penrose calls them in reference to the Roman god of cyclic time, belongs to a large chain of universes ordered in time. So we'll just, for reference, we have aeon. But there's also with AE. Anyway, note the AE, that's all. Conformal cyclic cosmology, while highly speculative, challenges the established orthodoxy of the standard model of cosmology that posits a period of rapid inflation after the Big Bang. This rapid inflation must be posited to account for otherwise unexplained facts, for example, the homogeneity of the universe in the earlier times. However, in conformal cyclic cosmology, the inflation came before the Big Bang in the last days of a previous universe and not between 10 to the negative 36 and 10 to the negative 33 seconds after the Big Bang in our universe, as in the standard model. This inflation turns out to be the final complete expansion of the previous aeon, which ended in a state of thermal death, everything being flattened out and destroyed by the expansion of space. Thus, conformal cyclic cosmology provides an interesting and somewhat natural explanation for the very existence of inflation. Let's see. So basically, this relates to, it makes sense in a way, because there's mysterious aspects of What do we have? Standard model. We have the whole idea of a completed physics exists because it's sort of the idea that, oh, well, I mean, we pretty much know about physics, right? Like, there's not going to be any huge surprises. We're going to fill in some gaps here and there. And like, but how we think about it is basically how it is. That there's really not a lot of certainty there. I think there's an extent to which, the more we understand about science in a way, the less we understand about the world. This is certainly true. I'm thinking now of Zweibelson, because Zweibelson talks about, quantum. I'm curious, nuclear weapons, quantum theory are all tied to deep security concerns. Quantum bits. Okay, so part of it is just like it's going to make our computer stuff obsolete. Emerging quantum technology. One cannot predict what might recur beyond the event horizon of a super intelligent entity becoming a singleton, so on and so forth. And now we're into the references. So basically, like in this one, like in the standard model, like the Big Bang happens, and then the official story is that, the universe gets a lot bigger in like a very small amount of time. And then, so this is basically offering a different account for why that all happened. And it's basically saying that there's leftover energy or something is cycling through from a previous iteration of the universe. And that has a lot to do with explaining how our universe works. So anyway, interestingly, conformal cyclic cosmology has observable implications as signals of extremely energetic events happening at the end of the previous universe should appear in the cosmic microwave background, the remnant glowing of the Big Bang. These high-energy phenomena are of two kinds: supermassive black holes, collisions, and the final evaporation of black holes. These should show up in the CMB, cosmic microwave background, as circular temperature fluctuations, and physics are currently analyzing the CMB and debating whether we see any such thing. Conformal cyclic cosmology also addresses another mystery, the highly organized nature of the universe at its beginning. So this will also be another interesting thing to look at. Oh, funny. Past hypo? What is this? Thermodynamic asymmetry in time? Oh, dear. So the second law of thermodynamics states that disorder increases with time. If the universe is progressively getting more and more disordered, then surely moving backward to its origin, it better had been in a sufficiently ordered state to begin with. We thus have strong theoretical reasons to believe that the universe was highly ordered at its beginning. However, it's not what we see when we look at the remnant light of the Big Bang, our window on the first instance of the universe. At least this is so if we only focus on matter and non-gravitational interactions and set aside gravity. The universe at its beginning does not appear to be very well ordered according to empirical data. How then are we to explain this? So Roger Penrose accounts for this discrepancy in bringing a new ground for order and disorder to the fore. This source is the existence of gravitational interactions. This is also funny because this gravitational thing is reminding me of Interstellar. Like, my whole cosmology should be giving you Interstellar vibes, because the whole thing with Interstellar is, there's aliens who come and like show you a wormhole and show you how to fix your problem. But it turns out that the aliens who came to help you are maybe you in the future. So this is getting to the point where it's like, in the future, you need to come back and provide for something that, will help you get to that future. So that's already an idea, but I think taking it a further level of going back and creating the entire universe, that it seems like an important expansion of the horizon. I feel like in a way, like the sort of task that I'm setting for us is like, we need to basically achieve, some sort of like, not unity, but like a unity of purpose, or, we need to work together basically to come together and use technology to like restart the whole universe, and basically be willing to go through all of this again, and basically, engage with Nietzsche's idea of the eternal recurrence. And so I mentioned Nietzsche would come up a couple times. There's also Nietzschean affirmation, which basically means that, everything hangs together. And this is also, I'm never going to be able to remember. There's, I'm going to keep saying it badly. Pratit Samutpada, aka dependent co-origination, dependent arising. So basically, it's the idea that everything, this is specifically saying that everything is an emergent phenomenon, I think. And so everything is, whatever appears to be central to a thing is coming from outside. This also relates, for example, to nominalism. So the idea of like, do things have attributes? Is this thing red? And the answer is no, that thing's not really red. Like the redness of the thing is itself an emergent phenomenon from how that thing is interacting with your eyes and your, the languages that we have. Anyway, Nietzsche is saying with Nietzschean affirmation that if you accept one moment, you really accept everything. If you say yes to one thing, you say yes to the whole of existence because everything really hangs together. And this again flows back to this. Let's see if we can finally get to this. So entropy, the technical notion associated to the measure of order, is traditionally associated to non-gravitational interactions, as with a box filled with gas. So I was also mentioning the love of gravity. So basically, like in Interstellar, in addition to this, retrocausal thing, there's also this idea that love is sort of like gravity and can operate past time and space. So we're also going into that sort of hippy-dippy shit, because again, we're interacting with things like Leela here, where it's like we are the absolute and we created this universe for ourselves. And so why? Like my basic answer to that is because you want to have a good time with people. So that's what we're trying to organize. We're trying to organize a good incarnation, getting along, compassion, love, whatever you want to call it. And so the whole game is that, of course, that's difficult, right? Of course, there are things to overcome in terms of our ego or historical violence or like where we came from. Like, again, going back to this Holocaust thing, like, this is especially prescient for me because, my grandparents were in the Third Reich. My grandfather was in the Waffen-SS. It's a little complicated, whatever, because my grandfather was 17 in 1944. And I think it's funny that people know about this. It's the idea that you volunteered to join the army, but you were really heavily coerced. And this is also, also with the shade of story, like in a German family, people don't talk a lot about the Nazi times. Spoiler alert, right? But anyway, so there's some not mitigating things, but so technically my grandfather was a child soldier, but both my grandparents were in the Hitler Youth. And so basically, if there hadn't have been a Holocaust, if there hadn't have been a Third Reich, there wouldn't be me. And in a way, that's true for everyone, because again, everything hangs together, right? So this is something that I think about a lot in terms of like, do we condemn the past? Are we going to sit here and say that the past shouldn't have happened? Because if the past hadn't happened, we wouldn't be here. So we basically have to say, we wish we didn't exist. And of course, a lot of people feel that way in terms of like, why I didn't ask to be born. But, again, we're going to this realm where it's like, well, in a way you did, right? You created your own parents. So, but in terms of, this Holocaust theology and theodicy, this has everything to do with like the question of like, well, why is there a Holocaust? Why, not just why was the Holocaust necessary, but why was the Holocaust necessary for me to exist? Why do I have to grapple, with in addition to a lot of other things, right? My other side is American. We own slaves, but it's just like European colonialism, right? It's just like all of the freaking things in the world. Like, it's so complicated. Why do we have to deal with this? And it's basically because this is a game. Like, this is fun for God. Like, you're God, right? Like, you're Leela, right? And so it's like we've all incarnated here to deal with the most like, reprehensible bullshit of all time in order to understand the beauty of love, right? Like, that's basically what it is. And then, this omega point comes in because this is actually really great. I learned about this a couple days ago. But so this person's Catholic, right? So it's basically like Christ is drawing all things to himself, right? This is what Pierre Teilhard de Chardin thinks. So my thing, right, like I do what I call pansyncretism. I don't know if that even has it's basically the idea that, we're merging everything together. And so I definitely participate, in inclusivism, non-exclusivism. But so like inclusivism, what I basically mean by that is like, I'm fine with, the Jesuit priest framing this in terms of Jesus. But like, I think you can also frame this in terms of Hinduism or anything that you want to, really. Like you can do it in terms of, Tengrism. I always think about this because it's like the official religion of the Mongol Empire, which I don't know if you've heard of it, but it was a pretty big deal. So, you could think about it in terms of Tengrism, or you could think about it in terms of Christianity. But the point is, these things are not mutually exclusive. So when it comes to things, like Jesus saying, I am the way, this is another part where, it's like we have to interpret this a little creatively, right? Or at least like understand like what this means. Like, who is Jesus speaking as? Like, is Jesus somebody who's not you? Or, and again, another aspect of my idea is there's infinite reincarnation. Oh no. So experimental unit. Shoot, what was I looking for? There was inclusivism, pansyncretism. Oh yeah. So infinite reincarnation. It's basically the idea that we're all each other's past and future lives. So through this logic, we're all Jesus Christ. We will all eventually be Jesus Christ. Within my personal reading of the cosmology. Oh, I gotta go. But the basic idea is that maybe Jesus is the first, or I mean, there's Adam, right? But Jesus in a way stands for the first incarnated being. And so even if, there was a lot of time officially before the year 0, Jesus was really the first one to incarnate. And basically the whole idea of being killed and, atoning for the sins of everybody else is basically God coming down from heaven and being like, I'm about to incarnate a million fucking times and I'm going to hurt myself and it's going to be bad. But so this is I'm going to be perfect and then, submit myself to the atrocities of the world. And this is basically going to be like, I'm not asking you to do anything I wouldn't do, right? I came down as perfect and people killed me, right? So that's basically what's going to happen to you. You're going to be less perfect. You're still going to die. Except you're not you, you're me, right? From the perspective of God. Anyway, but so the point is, Jesus is in a way like the first incarnation, and it sort of makes it to where God is playing with house money. Because it's like, we're going to go through all these incarnations and learn to love, and it's going to be really messy. There's going to be a Holocaust. And so like the first, in a way, the first thing to do is to it's sort of a meta thing. It's like, okay, we're going to, sorry about everything that's about to happen. It's almost like, you're about to give a speech that you didn't prepare for. You're going to find your way through, but it's going to be ugly in the beginning. And that's basically, saying at the beginning of the speech, sorry, figure this out as I go along. That's basically what Jesus is. So when Jesus says, I am the way, in a way, I love parables and reading shit like this because it's like, no one comes to the Father except through me. So an important thing here is, Christian universalism, which basically means everybody's going to get to go to heaven. So the point is everybody's going to go to heaven, which means in this parlance, everybody's going to the Father, which means everybody's going through Jesus. But that doesn't mean what a lot of chuds basically think it means. It doesn't mean oh, I believe in Jesus, so you're better, and so you get to bully other people until they say they believe in Jesus. That's not what it means. It basically means, again, if the ground of our being is us all coming together at the end of time and forming the omega point, I would basically say, this is the body, if you want to, again, in Christian terms, this is the body of Christ. It's we're all, and this is henosis. This is there's a cool thing called apokatastasis. It's basically everything's being set right. Includes the ultimate salvation of everyone, including the damned and the devil, right? Beautiful. This is beautiful. I think it's, yeah, I would love to argue with people about Christian universalism. Because I think in terms of piecing all the religions together, Voltron style, you've got to come down as a Christian universalist, I believe. Anyway, so we're going to form the omega point. We're going to go back in time. We're going to not go back in time. We're going to create the past, right? We're going to cause ourselves. But, running out of time here, but I wanted to go ahead and introduce you to some of, the things that I think about when I'm designing, in a way, my own cosmology. And so this is in conversation with, Vervaeke talking about, the religion that's not a religion. People have talked about similar things where it's we need, in a way, a new kind of religion, which is accounting for the problems of the old ones. And so how do we do that? And so this is me basically being you basically do a Nietzschean affirmation. You say everything that exists is good. There's a reason for everything. And then whatever needs to happen in order to make that okay. Like that's where like this other aspect of oh, it's actually in, that was 9 months ago. How could that be? Anyway, the idea was, the idea of resurrection. The idea that you could bring people back to life. So like all those kids who died of cancer, or the people who died in a concentration camp, or whoever who died unhappy. It's the idea that through technology, like we will eventually be able to bring people back, and they will be able then to experience new things like in their lives. And so like the point is that at the end of time, everybody feels like really fulfilled, and they're like, wow, this was really like worth doing. And then, everybody votes to repeat the cycle again. And so, and also, I guess, because everybody's fulfilled, right? Everybody agrees that they had a good experience, right? Everybody has a 10 out of 10 review for the universe and incarnation, right? It becomes the case that you would be willing to trade places with anybody. And also, you might, be yourself, like the universe repeats like a million times, and you just like, oh no, I want to be myself. But after a while, you're like, I want a change of pace. And in general, this is a move for this cosmology, because it's like, in terms of our our immediate political position, we are building Svarga, right? We are building a domain for deities because we are becoming immortal. So we need to like figure out what we're going to do for all of time, right? And so what we're doing is we're basically starting a party, and we're going to take it to all the other dimensions, and we're going to go to the fucking Pure Land, and we're going to go to fucking Svarg. Like, anyway, like, yeah, this is just basically the most grandiose fucking like political or like theological plan you've ever heard of, right? But I think it's interesting, and I think it is important. Like in particular, again, this idea of Holocaust theology and Theodicy. It's becoming very clear to me that these are themes that are going to stick with me forever. And so, regardless of this grandiosity in terms of like, oh, we're all gonna be reborn and all this shit, it's like, yeah, I'm not sure about all that. But the fundamental reason why all this is coming up is fundamentally because like bad shit happens, and then like we get into this place where we don't understand why it's happening. And in particular, then in traditional theodicy, again, we get lost in this idea that it's somebody else's fault that this was done to us. And I don't think we consider enough that like we did this to ourselves. And so I'll end this here. I'll tie together a couple things. So I've talked about before, I like to interpret pop songs as being about religion. Well, I'd like to do that with everything. So I want to basically bring up the Meditations on First Philosophy. This is a notable skeptical text, right? Descartes is talking about like maybe there's a demon which is like fooling me. And so where I, again, circling back around to my issues with theodicy, entheism, panentheism and stuff, I'm basically just always thinking like, Descartes, why don't you consider the idea that you are the demon? You're tricking yourself, right? That never comes up. So anyway, it makes me think of this part of the Society of Spectacle, where thesis 2, where Devord writes, the image is detached from every aspect of life, fused in a common stream in which the unity of this life can no longer be reestablished. Reality considered partially unfolds in its own general unity as a pseudo-world apart, an object of mere contemplation. The specialization of images of the world is completed in the world of the autonomous image where the liar has lied to himself. The spectacle in general, as the concrete inversion of life, is the autonomous movement of the non-living. So the idea that the liar has lied to himself, that applies to this idea. The evil demon is fooling himself, right? Like you're doing it to yourself. Like I'm doing it to myself, right? I'm talking to myself on the computer about all this stuff. And it's like, why am I doing this? I'm working through, in a way, the trauma. This is an interesting thing. I mean, this is a good place to stop, right? It's like let's go over here to ChatGPT and just type this in. So there's a record somewhere. So it's basically like God's trauma at creating the world. So yeah, so we'll pick this up again. But so that's been your introduction to AI's cosmology. Thank you everybody for listening, and see you next time.